Hello and welcome to the Tank Index. Today, I really should have probably planned ahead because this video should really be before the T-18 one. But I mean, at the same time, I literally didn't know this tank existed until I was about halfway through the T-18 one. So that's why these are sort of backwards. And I apologize for there being no video Friday. I was really overwhelmed with some personal stuff like school. But yeah, let's just get on to the T-17, which the only reason I'm really doing this one is because it's a one-man tank, which I just find really interesting. So, to start off, in 1927, really a Soviet three-year plan almost began really to create a a mechanical and armored force by 1930. And in 1929's field regulation, Soviet officials basically said that the wars of the future would be ones of mass maneuvers with motorization and mechanization. And that's actually a pretty fair point because in World War One, I mean, most people think of World War One as it's all trenches and static warfare. But on the Russian front, I mean, it was really a much bigger war of movement. I mean, there were trenches, of course, but there's a lot more movement in that war, which makes sense why they think that the future would be one of mass maneuvers. Especially having stuff like motorization, mechanization. The Russian Empire did field some armored cars and some even artillery there, or sort of variant of artillery there. So in May of 1930, after they specified conducting some deep battle tactics, which, I mean, that would be very successful for them. Their first mechanized support, quote unquote, brigade would be created. That's the T-17 itself. So they used the T-16 chassis as the base model, only having a 2-cylinder 16 horsepower engine, which is pathetic. It had a rubber and steel chain tracks, and it could only go about 10 miles per hour, which, I mean, for a light 3-ton recon vehicle, I mean, this thing was meant for reconnaissance, so 10 miles per hour was pitiful. It had a riveted superstructure, which is just not good because if it's hit, the rivets could just bounce all around inside. The driver would be the commander, the driver, and having a machine gun. I mean, I can see why they think this because it's a recon vehicle. It's not supposed to get into combat, but I mean, that's still a bit too low. I mean, if there's one good thing about this tank, it had 10 to 14 millimeters of armor, which is at least something for its recon role. A prototype would be finished by the end of 1929, and it would be tested in January of the next year. And in June of that year, testing would show that it had at least better mobility than the T-18, so it served its recon role something. One of the biggest drawbacks of the area was track failure, something really common in tanks. A second prototype would use the Cagresi, I don't know French, track system, as seen on the left. It was considered a failure though, and future tanks would continue with the full metal tracks. 3 prototypes would be considered in total. In 1926, the Design Bureau, which would later become OKMO, they began working on this single-man light recon vehicle, process. And this would require a new chassis and engine, and the project would end up really just stalling for ages. On March 3rd, 1928, several engineers, though, as Ginsburg, which would work on tons of Soviet tank designs, will start a brand new draft. And that's really what led to this tank. The slides are a bit out of order, but that's really what led to the tank. This thing just stalled forever, and then it was kind of meh, and then they kind of bring it back up again, and it was still meh. This tank was just awful. I mean, for a tankette weighing 3 tons, 10 miles per hour is pretty pathetic, especially only armed with a machine gun. I mean, a lot of people might say, look at the Cardin-Lloyd tankette, or look at the Bren gun carrier, right? But you look at the Cardin-Lloyd tankette, I mean, that's a 2-man vehicle at least, I mean, you can't have a 1-man tank. That just doesn't work. Its engine was quite poor as well, likely resulting in an inevitable failure. As a recon vehicle, it just wasn't good, and some Cardin-Lloyd tankettes would have honestly been better. The only benefit was it gave some experience, which would lead to the better T-18, which we've already discussed.